When I was a high school senior, new neighbors moved in next door. This was fairly significant as we hadn't gotten anyone new in the neighborhood for several years. The first day they moved in, I came home from visiting my grandparents to find our back door had been kicked in. My dad went next door to see if they had maybe seen anything, but they denied having seen or heard anything. That night, I had to close my bedroom window because they were being so loud and screaming, and their house was next to my bedroom. Keep in mind our houses are spaced fairly wide apart on my street, so they would have to be pretty loud for me to be able to hear it. The son was the most concerning. He started showing up in our driveway and in our yard at 4 or 5 in the morning. My dad felt bad for him and introduced us, thinking the kid was just lonely and that we could be friends. It turned out we went to the same high school. I hadn't seen him there before, but that was about to change when I suddenly started running into him just about everywhere at school. Sometimes on my way to class, he would walk right up to me and block my way so that I would just have to stop in my tracks, and he wouldn't leave until I said hello to him. I thought that this was all a coincidence, our running into each other so often in the hallways. One day I was curious what class he might be going to as he passed me once again, so I paused and looked behind me. What I saw was my neighbor inching slowly back into a doorway and peering with wide eyes around the corner, as if to watch me. This was weird, a little unsettling, but I figured he was waiting for a friend and was going to jump out and scare them or something. But then, the very same thing happened a few weeks later at parent-teacher conferences, when he walked past my father and I, only to hide behind some bleachers and peer out at us. Not only that, but at night when I would be dressing for bed, I often heard footsteps crunching outside my window in the backyard, which, by the way, faced woods. I never had to keep my blinds closed before for that reason, but one night, when I noticed the footsteps, I closed them, and heard someone's voice mumbling angrily. By now, I thought all of this was creepy and weird, but my dad still thought that he just didn't have very many friends, and that I should be nice to him. But I got a terrible feeling from the guy and refused. My father would scold me for being harsh and judgmental. Even my friends thought that maybe the guy just had a crush on me, and that's why he was acting this way. Either way, I managed to avoid him for the rest of the school year, and a few months later, he got a job at a store near our neighborhood. One night, he followed a coworker outside and tried to assault her. It just so happens that my father was also in the store the night it happened, and saw our neighbor as he was being dragged back into the store by a coworker. My father said that our neighbor was acting like a wild animal, his eyes bulging, veins popping out of his neck. My dad did apologize to me that night, and admitted that I'd been right with my hunch that there was something off about that guy. A few weeks after that, I went outside at night to feed a stray cat. We'd gotten a lot of snow, and there was ice and snow collected on the hedge in my front yard, which was right next to the step where I was feeding the cat. I suddenly had a strange feeling that I wasn't alone outside, and when I heard a huge crash in the hedge beside me, I rushed back into the house. When I told my father what I'd heard, he thought I was overreacting, but I was so insistent that there was someone else outside in the bushes, to the point that my father went out with his pistol to check. There in the snow were footprints behind the hedge, coming from and returning to the house next door. What I'd heard was an icicle that must have fallen when whoever it was had brushed past it. I had a hard time sleeping at night from then on, and I never went outside by myself at night after that. Thankfully, the neighbor moved away in the next year, but those events shook me so much that to this day, I don't really like going out in my yard at night in the dark.
I'm a single father, and I have a daughter who just started middle school. I've been trying to teach her about responsibility lately, so her recent tasks have been to make sure that the house is locked up before bed. I usually double check them, but a few nights ago I worked a long day, and after dinner I had to lie down, and I just fell asleep without meaning to. In the middle of the night, something woke me up. The room was dark and I couldn't see anything, so I just laid still for a while listening. I thought I almost heard breathing, like a heavy, labored breathing. The floor creaked nearby, and I swear I could hear footsteps approaching my bed. I'm just dreaming, I thought to myself, and I decided that if I was still and quiet, this dream would go away. However, the creaking became louder, and I heard footsteps approaching my bed, along with the heavy breathing I thought I heard earlier. I noticed a shadow coming around the corner of my bed, so I closed my eyes. This was definitely a dream. Sleep paralysis or something like that. The footsteps stopped near my face, and I could smell alcohol, like a stale alcohol on someone's breath who had been drinking heavily. The creaking resumed, and the footsteps faded. I must have fallen back asleep after that, because the next thing I knew, the sun was rising, and it was time for me to get ready for work. As I headed into the garage with my coffee, my heart dropped. The garage door was wide open. My daughter usually left for school an hour after me, so there was no reason for it to be open this early, unless it had been open all night. Suddenly, the sounds I'd heard in my bedroom came back to me. That hadn't been a dream after all. I rushed back into the house to check on my daughter, who fortunately was still in bed, fast asleep. I woke her up and asked her about the garage door. I saw the look of guilt on her face. I knew she'd forgotten about it. Thankfully, she was fine, and hadn't heard anyone come into the room that night. But I let her know she would be losing a few privileges that weekend for forgetting something so important. It didn't look like anything was stolen. Just a few things moved around, and a loaf of bread was missing. We were lucky whoever came into the house just paced around my room and took some bread. That situation could have been much, much worse, and I hope my daughter realizes that.